What is up, my ninjas? I am Strydent, and welcome to another superhero film attack. Today we're tackling the much maligned King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. Now, I am a fan of Arthurian legend. Probably my favorite anime character of all time is Saber from Fate Stay Night. Not for waifu reasons, but because I like the idea of adding that extra piece to the Arthurian legend that what if Arthur was a girl and there was, considerable amount of work to keep the true identity of, this King of Kings secret, I like that. I like that idea. But anyway, I'm a fan of Arthurian legend. I dig the concepts. I dig the time period. I dig this version of Old England. I like the fact that in this version they're not interested in all of the things that fucked up history. You know what I'm saying? All of the jacked up things that, not all of it, but the things that we know ended up happening in the real world that kind of jack things up, for lack of a better word. I like that there's nobility, like full on nobility, and I like the fact that there's also full on straight up evil. We got that now. It's just not always clear cut. I like the fact that Arthur fights for everybody. I like that in these films nowadays they try to make the knights very, how do I put this? They're not super multicultural, but they're all inclusive because you have different types of knights from different parts of the world, which means that Arthur traveled and stuff, and I like that. To me, that makes it more interesting. But this film, people hated the living hell out of this film. I mean, like every so often we get that where a movie comes along that audiences just want to say is dumb, or reviewers online just want to condemn the film, because it either strays far from what they're used to, or it has concepts that they're not willing to accept. I mean, there's so many ways that this works, but it galvanizes all the hating public. You know how the internet works. It's a very fickle machine where it doesn't take much to get everybody online or in line with a hate campaign, And it's kind of annoying because sometimes it's not warranted. Most of the time it's not warranted, but that's what we get, Um, I am I'm a fan of Guy Ritchie to some degree, but not 100%. I don't think all his movies were great. Like, I didn't really like the Sherlock Holmes films. Um, the first one was definitely better than the second one, but I just don't. For me, I didn't feel like Sherlock Holmes needed an updated treatment, if that makes any sense. He seemed like his stories are fine set in the time that they're set in with the style that we're used to. It almost feels like when you change that, it messes things up. And that's just my opinion, because it feels like to me it takes away from the things that I find interesting about Sherlock Holmes. But with Arthurian legend, it's always been open to interpretation. The problem is only a few films, a few versions of this story were done where the characters were done right, to give us the future directors and future writers the open air to reinterpret those characters. And this is a problem that I have with superhero films, comic book adaptations, because I mention this all the time and people argue with me as if I don't have a leg to stand on, but it makes sense. This film suffers from the problem that we don't seem to, the lack of respect that we get when it comes to adapting stuff from comics. Usually people will say shit like, it's a comic book movie. You know, I don't care. It can't be exactly what you saw in the comics on screen. And this is after 6 Spider-Man movies. 3 of which, I want to say, or 4 of which, he pretty much looks like the comics. You know, almost exactly. In some cases, better. This is after we've had 3 Captain America films, one of which he actually wears the Captain America costume, the original tights, and later on, he wears 2 other variations of the costumes that we have seen in comics. And yet you're still saying in 2017 that, you know, shit that's done in the comics can't be done on screen. If that is your thinking, then you shouldn't be involved in this conversation. Because that's not sound judgment. This movie takes all the King Arthur, the traditional Arthurian legend elements, and just ramps some of it up. It doesn't go full on crazy with everything. It ramps some of that shit up. And in my opinion, it works. A lot of people have been harsh. They said the movie is loud and obnoxious and it's dumb and it's... Get out of here. You sound like an old man who doesn't enjoy, or an old person who just doesn't enjoy modern cinema. I don't find, for me personally, I'm an action junkie. So for me, I just need good action. And a lot of times, if the story is plausible enough to get from point A to point B, I'm good. This movie, it wasn't like a very deep, hard to understand story because, like I said before, it's Arthurian legend. How would you not know what is going on? You know what I'm saying? Like, how would you be confused about the events in this story when it's stuff most of us have read some story or watched some version of this in our lifetime. So what is there to not get? You know what I mean? What is there to jack up in this story? What is there to make difficult for you to understand in this story? Like, if you don't understand what was going on in this film, that's more of a personal problem. That's not so much the filmmakers are doing something wrong. I found the movie extremely easy to read, easy to understand. The plot points, you know, they're super straightforward. I don't understand where the difficulty is coming from. I don't understand where all the hate is coming from. I had no problems, none whatsoever, understanding what was presented in this film. None. It's a very straightforward story. Very straightforward. Characters are almost color-coded. So there's no way for you to have, you know, that problem that a lot of modern films have where the palette is so dead that you confuse multiple characters for, you know, for one another. It wasn't like that in this. So I'm not going to get on the bandwagon and just hate on this film. I thought the film was well done. I thought the action was well done. I liked the characters. I thought every performance was on point. I thought the effects were pretty awesome. The whole Skeletor bad guy at the end, well, in the movie, I should say, because he's in multiple parts. I thought that was awesome. It gives me hope for when they actually do a Masters of the Universe film and they actually, you know, do Skeletor, you know. But I enjoyed this movie thoroughly, and I don't understand what people are complaining about. I'm going to go into detail about what I liked and what worked. I'm going to talk about the story, you know, the setup, the visuals, the action, the characters, and then the end game. Because you got to understand how it all works together for the benefit of the whole. It's not a very difficult plot. I mean, this is one of those films where if you were to pick up the box, if you saw it in the store, the synopsis on the back of the box is dead on. It's 100%. And I'm going to get to that first with the setup. All right, so the setup, the story, it's real simple. After the murder of his father, the throne, you know, that was meant for Arthur was snatched up by his uncle Vortigern. Since Arthur was kind of forced out, he has to grow up on the streets, you know, hustling, scratching, trying to survive, growing up with the kind of people that if he had stayed royalty, he would have never, ever came into contact with. And he has no idea. He kind of, I guess, due to the trauma of the situation in which he lost his parents, he represses the memory of seeing this murder happen. And he does see the murder happen. He eventually gets snatched up by Vortigern's people and brought back into the royal shtick, the royal universe, and is forced to pull the sword from the stone because Vortigern grabs people at random, all the men that should be about the age that Arthur would be, and he wants them to attempt to pull the sword from the stone because if they do, he can kill them and then he has the sword. Not understanding how the sword actually works, how Excalibur actually works. But anyway, Arthur comes back into contact with Excalibur, or with Vortigern, pulls Excalibur out of the stone, and then he is kind of set on this path to embrace his destiny and become, you know, the king of England and the legend that everybody knows. Now, like I said, if I say that in a short form, that's literally the Wikipedia entry, or the, I'm sorry, not the Wikipedia entry, but the, it's like the back of the box. It's that straightforward, yet there are reviews that say the film is obnoxious, that it's snatch-a-lot, they called it. I'm like, what? Are you serious? Snatch-lot. It's too uneven, they said. Because they're thinking franchise. This is a one-off story. You don't need a franchise. They said there was nothing. One of the reviews here says, I think it's from the Wall Street Journal. Really? Because I want to hear what the Wall Street Journal has to say. And I know people are going to argue with me about this. I want to hear what people who love movies are going to say. You know, not snobs. People who love movies. If you love film, and you love action, and you love this genre, it's a fun film. The film itself is well directed. Everything is well staged. It's not too over the top. You know, you watch Star Wars, and there are elements of Star Wars that are just juvenile. But the production design is so extravagant and so well done that you just ignore it and you just go along for the ride. But when you call out Star Wars for doing something kind of, people go nuts. And they try to defend and defend and defend as if the movie can do no wrong. I mean, George Lucas is a terrible writer. He comes up with really awesome ideas, but he's a terrible writer. Much like David Goyer. He has some good ideas every now and then, but he's a terrible writer. You never give that guy the reins. Guy Ritchie, on the other hand, he tells good stories. Sometimes it's a lot of details, you know, because he's really into the way that the story is told. But the elements are all there for it to make sense. If you're paying attention, you'll get it. If you're not the kind of person who's going to say, oh, the accents threw me off. I couldn't understand their accents. I didn't know what they were saying. What language were they speaking? Come on now. If you're that guy, then, of course, this review is not for you. You know what I mean? But the setup works. You literally watch as you meet Uther doing something super heroic, and it displays the power of Excalibur. And you understand that with Excalibur, Uther is a force to be reckoned with. You understand who Mordred is, you know, and the part that he plays in the story as the evil mage that kind of set the wheels of fate in motion. Then you know who freaking Vortigern is, and you see where he's coming from in this whole game and how smarmy he is, which is crazy seeing Jude Law play a smarmy character. Not that he's never done it before, it's just that that's not his shtick. Usually he plays the clean-cut, straight-laced, handsome guy, you know? Even if he's doing something grimy, he's still that guy. In this, he's not so clean-cut, he's kind of creepy, and you can tell something. Before they even explain to you what's going on, you can clearly tell that guy is not one of the good guys. You know what I mean? Which is straight up. It's well done. Um, all of the performances work. All of them. No one falls short. I don't know what other people are talking about with bad acting. No, it's not that I can't see good acting from bad acting. No one does a bad performance. No one. No one has a bad performance. You know what I mean? Not when we have films like The Room to clearly outline to you what a bad performance looks like. This does not have bad performances. It's obviously not Oscar-worthy shit because these kind of films don't get Oscars anymore. It's not since like the early days, the good old days of James Cameron and all those guys, back when the Planet Hollywood dudes were on top, that people got, you know, what was it, Academies for effects or Oscars for their effects and shit like that, and a lot of action and horror films would get them. It's not, those days are gone, so that shit doesn't happen anymore. So, you know, this movie, it was, things were beyond serviceable, especially for what they were trying to get across. And I had no problems with that. Now you're going to go back and look at reviews and you're going to see that other people had all these issues being snobby and elitist and shit. It was fun. I was able to follow everything that was happening. The justifications for things made sense. None of it was as bad as Transformers, where thing 1 happens and they tell you thing 1 leads to thing 2 in Act 1. But then in Act 3, they tell you thing 1 leads to thing 10. And you're like, wait, there's 10 things? Where did the 10th thing come? Where did, you know, 3 through 10 come from? You never told us about those. None of that shit happens in this film. Everything is straight up explained either visually or verbally, you know, in exposition, verbal exposition. So you don't have to wait to understand things. There's one thing that you have to wait, but it's part of the plot because it has to do with Arthur's trauma from seeing his parents killed. There's parts of this story that he doesn't remember because, like I said, he's locked it away due to it being traumatic. I mean, he was like 3 or 4 or something like that, maybe 5 when the shit happened. And then he grows up in poverty and has to figure out a way. I mean, obviously, if he's going through all the traumatic shit after losing his parents, he's going to have to lock some things away so that he can function. And that's how it works. So I don't know where they're coming from with this. It's well done acting. It's not like this is the most, like any of the portrayals are so far in the other direction that, you know, you're like, wow, I would have never thought that so-and-so would act like this. No, it's not like that. It's very straightforward, you know. This character is like this. If anything, the future, the guys that would someday become the Knights of the Round Table, they're the farthest from what we know of the Knights of the Round Table to be like, because usually when you meet them, they're already knights. So a good chunk of the knights, or those who would become the knights, they're just like Arthur. They're rough around the edges. They haven't really been through stuff. They're actually not knights yet, which is kind of cool in my opinion, because it's, you know, everybody's doing these origin stories and stuff. So if you're gonna commit to doing it, why not just commit to doing it and just give us the origin for all these characters, you know? I don't really have an issue with that. So I was cool with the way they did that. And I think that, you know, like I said, if you're an action junkie and you've watched more than, you know, 5 movies or something, you'll enjoy it. So, yeah, setup, story, quality. Now, I don't know how people got to the conclusion that this movie looked bad. People said it looked generic and it looked bad. It didn't look generic considering the last King Arthur film we got had no special effects. It had no magic. It just had generic things like exploding arrows and, you know, like sword clanging and fire and shit. You know what I mean? And a fight on an lake, an iced over lake. Now, don't get me wrong. I like that film. I like the idea of it being kind of a non-magical story of the knights and whatnot. I like that. It wasn't bad, but it had a lot of it was missing a lot of the elements that every other version had, and I didn't think it was necessary to put King Arthur in that world that they started putting characters, heroic characters in since Batman Begins. Everything doesn't have to be Nolanized, you know? So here, it all came back. Granted, it came back with a twist because you have the editing style that Guy Ritchie is known for. And you have the dialogue style that Guy Ritchie is known for. So it wasn't super hardcore Shakespearean English, but this shouldn't be new to you because they've kind of gone in this direction with dialogue in medieval, you know, setting for a long time. Ever since the Romeo and Juliet, I think Baz Luhrmann did Romeo and Juliet in the 90s. He switched it where the visuals didn't match the speech. Then everyone else went the other direction, where they'd make those movies that look like a Sword and Sandals epic, and they're speaking our English, modern English. So, you know, that's just one of the things Guy Ritchie does. Even though the dialogue is still fairly, you know, proper, quote unquote, you know, British English. But the visuals were fine. It felt like a Sword and Sandals epic. I don't know what people want. You put too much color, they say it looks like a cartoon. You put not enough color in there, they say it's murky and dead and nothing looks original. The whole Lord of the Rings, everything, had all these things in it. It had scenes where in certain places where it was necessary, there was color. But in places where nothing, like this world is like degrees of Mordor. There's the street. Well, there's the castle after Uther, because they show during Uther's time there was color in the landscape. And there's some color still. There's greens and stuff, you know, greens and some browns and reds and such. But once Vortigern gets into, you know, the throne, the color is gone because they're showing you that this dude's not good. So the castle looks like shit. He's putting all his money into the tower that he's building. Being in the streets, in the gutter, it's not pretty. So, you know, so people went in with their own preconceived notions and missed the point. And they, you know, dissed this thing a lot. And I feel like it's unnecessary. The film looks good. The effects especially are pretty awesome. Especially once Excalibur is turned on. And I don't mean turned on like, oh yeah, boner-wise or something. No, I mean once it's activated, it's pretty nice effects. The kind of effects that I wish were used more in superhero films these days, that for some reason they're just not. So, you know, I think I feel, in my opinion, which is obvious because this is my review, they succeeded when it came to the visuals of this film. I don't understand the issues people have with it. People talk about too much CGI. Well, then how do you propose they do some of this stuff? You know, show me the movie that did all this stuff practically. Because there aren't any movies that have done fight scenes with that aren't kung fu with this level of clarity and craziness that did not use any kind of CG. So I don't even want to hear that as a complaint. You know, I watch Angry Joe and he constantly says that shit. And I'm like, you sound like someone who has no idea how movies are made, and that, you know, effects are there for a reason. And just because you know how the effect was made, it doesn't necessarily, and it should not necessarily, take away from your enjoyment of the film. You know now that Hollywood and the video game industry are like hand in hand. You have the same people working on both. I remember when the PlayStation came out, one of the things they used to push the PlayStation was a demo disc that showed you that the same tech that's in the PlayStation was the same tech that was used, some of it, for Jurassic Park. So I don't understand why it's, you know, it's that difficult. Also, if you've ever worked in the games industry on the development side, from, you know, illustration, concept art, etc., you can just look at the stuff and see that it's the same guys. It's a lot of the same guys that work in film doing concept art for games. So I don't understand this hatred for CG. I'm not saying that films need to always be 100% CG. I'm not saying that there aren't films that use it the wrong way. This film is not one of them. The things that were CG needed to be CG, and it worked. So I have a feeling that if you ignore the reviews and just watch for yourself, you'll see that this is actually a good one. And it's part of the reason why I'm even doing this review. I felt like this film got some unfair criticism, and I don't get it. You know, it's maybe it's Charlie Hunnam. Maybe that's just the way they do with him. Because they did the same thing with Pacific Rim, and Pacific Rim was a good movie. It was fun. It didn't have a shitload of plot holes. Like I said, when you have movies like Transformers and The Room, you know what you should know what bad looks like. I can go even worse. Cyborg Cop. Check that shit out, you know? The American Ninja movies after 2 and 3, you know? Those are bad movies. They're fun to watch. They can be guilty pleasures, but they're bad. Resident Evil, almost the whole series. We'll give the first and the second one a pass, even though the second one is bad and it's a guilty pleasure of mine. Let's say from 3 on, those movies are terrible, but they rake in the money and they bring in the people because people love the franchise, even if they know that the franchise is not going to be done justice. That's not the case here. The elements from Arthurian legend that you need, they're there. They didn't hide anything. They didn't get rid of anything. They tweaked things to make it fit this version of the story in a way that worked. Now the action. This is my favorite thing in most films because I'm an action junkie. I've told you guys this a million times. The action and choreography was on point. Everybody, it wasn't Blade, the movie that doesn't exist, Blade Trinity, where everybody's on the same level as the main character. Nah, it didn't need to be like that, because if it was like that, then it would completely negate the concept of Excalibur. What we got was Charlie Hunnam essentially turning into He-Man once he activates the power of Excalibur. Once the power of Excalibur fills his body, he becomes ridiculously powerful and fast and resilient, and his senses just go off the chain, where he can snatch arrows at full speed just seconds out after he avoids getting hit by them, and then use them as a weapon, you know, and hit with the force of a fucking hurricane. I mean, and it's all presented with such clarity and style that it just was like, this is dope. This is awesome. When Uther uses it, you just get the idea before he even does anything. You just get that feeling like the shit is about to break right now. You know, the shit breaking is about to happen. You're about to shit, the bad guy's about to shit up their back. Like, it's done. And it's all presented in such clarity and in such style, with the camera movement and the amount of confidence in what is being shown and when it's being shown. Even the movements, they quickly show you that Arthur had training. And they didn't go the cheap route where they're all carrying broadswords, but they're doing freaking, you know, Chinese wushu sword forms and shit with broadswords and stuff. No, they didn't go that route. They just made him have a level of fluidity to his movements that makes things work a little bit better. So I was impressed. And I think that if you like action, you will be impressed too. There's nothing that happens with the regular characters that you're going to be like, why did he do that? You know how The Musketeer kind of frustrated people because it was Hong Kong style action, even though the guy was a swashbuckler? You don't have that here. It was more confidently handled. And I think they did a good job being on point with their choreography. I do want to see who the action director was, because I think that their action was just, man, it was good. It was real good. And I don't understand. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna keep saying it. I don't understand the reason why they hate what they hate so much. You know. I don't know. That's pretty much how I feel about that. It's not too much else that I can add to the action. Just check it out. The end fight is totally worth the price of admission. It's quality. A lot of times in films like this, the end game betrays the rest of the film, and a lot of people have problems with how we get to where we get to. You watch Transformers, and the build-up always feels like you're going to get something way better, bigger, more intense than what you end up getting. Then when you get to the end, it's just a lot of shit happening all at the same time, and it doesn't really answer all the questions that it brought up, you know? This answered all the questions. What is it that throughout the film you hear Arthur's being told that he is repressing? You know, he's fighting the sword. He's not giving in. He's not seeing everything that he needs to see to learn, you know, to move to the next step in using the blade. And so you're wondering throughout the film, what is it that he needs to see? What is it that he needs to understand? What is he not seeing? And then you finally see it. That he saw the whole thing, so he knew who the villain was. He knew his father was a just dude. He knew his mom got killed. He knew that the sword stuck into his father, and his father became the stone. There were so many little things. You know I spoil shit, so at some point I was going to get into this. There were so many little pieces to the puzzle that Guy Ritchie and his people tweaked so that it had a more fantastical, high fantasy feel to it. When his father, Uther, was struck down by his brother, and his brother was using magic to disguise himself, but at the moment that he knew his brother was dead or dying, he revealed himself. But Uther throws the sword up, takes a knee, and the sword falls, it stabs him, it falls into his back, and he dies. Then he turns to stone, and the dock that they're fighting on crumbles underneath the weight of the stone, and he falls to the bottom of a lake. The same lake in which Arthur's mother, after she was killed by Vortigern, she fell into the lake. Later on, when you see the Lady of the Lake, her face isn't fully revealed, and it leads you to believe that the Lady of the Lake is the mom. I could be wrong, and it could just be someone who kind of looks like his mom. But you kind of get that that feel, and I like that. The same thing with the father becoming the stone. It made sense, you know. It's like this is how you do things, you know. This is how you make. This is how you make a. This is how you put a twist to it, I guess is what I'm saying. This is how you put a twist to the Lady in the Lake and the sword and the stone and all of that shit. You twist it up by tweaking how we get there, you know? This all adds to the end game. In the end, when he finally, he's given herbs by this, the herb, he's given some of that herb. He's given these herbs from a mage that is sent to help you know, Arthur gain control over the sword. This mage is not Merlin. I saw a number of reviews where people kept saying that, oh, they did something different by making Merlin a girl. Merlin is not a girl in the film. Merlin is Merlin, and they show you Merlin doing, in the beginning, they show him doing, like, forging Excalibur. The mage, she's the last mage. She's just the mage. It even says so in the credits of the film. It's just one of those things, you know. I don't get why people didn't pay enough attention to things that were going on in the film. Because if they were, then they would see where all these things fit. But anyway, long story short, Arthur finally sees the things he needs to see. And he goes the fuck off with Excalibur. And it's beautiful. It's the kind of stuff that I wish that our superhero films did more often. Because it's kind of frustrating that we have this is post-Matrix. And The Matrix essentially was a superhero film that showed you that we could do superheroes without costumes. You know, this is what we're capable of effects wise with, you know, superheroes these days. We should do it. And then now, post Matrix, we get superhero films that have fight scenes that don't showcase the powers, properly showcase the powers of the characters doing all the fighting. To me, that's bogus, and the shit needs to stop. Here, and this is why I made this video a superhero film attack, King Arthur is a super heroic fictional character. You can call him whatever you want because he has other, you know, he fits in other boxes as well because he's, you know, somewhat of a political figure, or he was a political figure because he was a king. There's validity to be discussed about whether or not all this stuff was true. Was there actually a King Arthur? Was there actually an Excalibur? What did it look like? Etc., etc., whatever. But in literature and in film, he is a superhero. You know? He's like one of the early ones. He's just like Prince Adam, you know, and He-Man. It's just like that, you know. So the superheroic elements of having Excalibur, I like that they actually went into that. When Arthur commits to his, you know, to the fight, the sword answers him, and it gives him power, and he is unstoppable. And you get that at the very end. Vortigern. There's a line in the beginning about him actually having trained with Merlin and, I'm sorry, with Mordred, before Mordred turned on everybody. So at that point, it's not clear how much training and what he specifically was learning, like what he could do. But you find out that he was able to completely transform himself with the help of these mermaids. He was able to transform himself into this other being that was like a giant skull knight that fought with a scythe. And he's like burning, and his cape is made of like smoke and ash and whatnot. It was awesome. It made Ares in Wonder Woman look like a straight up pansy. And this dude, he was huge, and he was fast. He was strong. I mean, he was clearly a match for anyone holding Excalibur. It's just, as the director, it's your job to show us how the person holding Excalibur is able to defend themselves against such a monster. And you get that. The camera, like I said in the action portion, the camera follows the action perfectly. The emotional content of this fight is there. When Arthur gets his ass throttled and he is almost out of the fight, he has to be reminded, he has to remind himself what it was he was fighting for in the first place, because this doesn't seem like a worthy, you know, like the fight seems like he's, you know, he was set up to die. Then he remembers, wait a second, this motherfucker killed my family. It's because of him that I'm in this situation. So he gets a second wind, and it's over. It's a literal He-Man moment. And I thought it was well done. When he stands up to all the Blacklegs, which are the soldiers of the, you know, of Vortigern. That also is another beautiful moment. The moment when Blue Boy watches his dad get his ear chopped off. Awesome moment. Because you realize, actually, you watch his dad get his throat slit by the king, you know, by Vortigern. Awesome moment. I mean, no performance in here was whack. You know, none. It's not like when we were watching Iron Fist, which was terrible to begin with, and you had that one guy, what was his name, Makoto or something, and he was like, "You are a doctor. Help her." And it comes out of nowhere. You're like, "Wait, really? Help her? Where did this come from, and why are you all of a sudden so depressed? Like, what's going on, homie?" Nothing in this film is on that level of bad. Nothing in this film is on the level of The Room. Nothing in the film is on the level of like Birdemic, if you want to talk about bad CG. Nothing in the film is as bad as, like I said, the later American Ninja films. Nothing is like that. Nothing is even on that level. So I don't know where they're getting this shit from. This is one of those films where they did the thing that everyone bitches at us comic book fans when we have something to say about this being done. What is it? What are you talking about, Strydent? I'm talking about when a comic book is translated into screen, liberties are always taken with it willy-nilly to the point where it may not even be the same character anymore. But people tell us we shouldn't get mad because it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, you can't do everything you've seen on screen. And that's debunked. Look at all the Batman. We finally have had Batman on screen that looked just like what he looked like in the comics. Just with a little bit of texture added in. But he was gray and black and muscular as hell. And, you know, a couple years before that, people were saying he would look stupid, blah, 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 blah. That's why you don't fucking make movies. So concern yourself with watching them and let the adults, you know, critique them. Some of these adults are going to be biased and they're going to be elitist and they're going to diss films that are action or having fun with their subject matter, like this one. And others are going to be open to the fact that the film has fun with its own subject matter because that's what it's there for. And that's what you got here. So I hope I actually, because, you know, I have a lot of opinions and feelings about these things. And I hope that in articulating those to you guys, I didn't go too far off and not give you enough reasons why the film actually works. I have a lot of praise for this movie just based on the fact that everyone hated it. Well, not everyone. A lot of people hated it. It didn't make its whole budget back. You know, it was like, what, 20-something million shy of it, I want to say. 30-something. No, 20-something. My bad. The box office, I'm sorry, budget was set 175. It made 148.7 million. So it was shy of its budget. But, you know, this is one of those films that I'm pretty sure years later, someone's going to do a piece saying the genius of this film. You know what I mean? Or why this film actually works. And then, you know, we'll have a different story. So anyway, those are my thoughts on this film. Don't believe all the hate. This is one of those films that it goes in that same pocket that Ace Combat Assault Horizon goes into. It's not perfect, but it's fun. It's well done, and it's worth the time. So put some time, you know, set some time aside and watch this film. It's a good action film. You will enjoy it. That's it for me. You guys have been great. Peace outside. Thank you for watching my video. If you enjoyed what you saw, please give it a like, a share, let your friends know. Check me out on social media. All the links are in the description. And if you really want to help me out big time, jump on Patreon and support the channel. Every little bit helps, the smallest amount to the largest amount. And last but not least, check out my comic, War of the Gods. Issue 2 is on sale now on Indie Planet. And the links are in the description. It's some superhero fun. And as a smaller independent book, it needs all the views, all the eyes on it as possible. So check it out, show it to your friends. Every view helps greatly. And yeah, that's it for me. Thanks again.